Hello. Today I'm going to be picking up on page 16 of Cloak of Obscurity. I didn't hear anyone behind me. I was thinking so deeply when the hand touched my arm that I jumped in surprise. I whirled to face Lee, who stared at me pleadingly with huge blue-black eyes. "Pardon," said the elf in a husky whisper. I didn't mean to startle you, but please, can you read my cards? I have a question. I'll pay you. I'll make a pouch to match your boots. Please, I need to know something. The last thing I wanted right then was the opportunity to predict doom, destruction, and hangnails on another member of the Tanner household. However, Lee had my sleeve in a death grip, and his eyes held the hopeless desperation known only to the young, for whom eternity might stretch as far as next week. I'd worn that look often enough while in the throes of trying to convince Father to let me practice magic. To be completely honest, I still wore it fairly often, especially when women were concerned. "Lee," I said gently, "does your master know you're out here?" He shook his head. "Well, then we'd better make this quick. What's your question?" He looked at the ground. Apparently, I thought, he's used up his allotment of words for the day in the first plea. "Never mind," I said. "Here, the cards know. Think of your question." I held out the deck. "Take one card and look at it." He drew the star. "Does that satisfy you?" I asked. He was staring at the card in puzzlement. "What does it say?" he asked, pointing to the words at the bottom. "It says, Star of Heart's Desire," I said. The elf's skin grew even darker. He was blushing. Until that moment, I hadn't thought elves could blush. "It means that your question is answered favorably, but it will take time and hard work before you reach your goal." Lee flashed a shy half-smile. "Get back home," I told him, "before anyone knows you're gone. And don't bother about paying me, I mean it." I will see you again," he said as he left, "when we have more time. And I will pay you." He ducked between two shops and vanished. I headed back to the Snake and Egg, wondering what his question had been. I guessed he was in love with Allison. It made sense to me. After all, I'd only met her twice, and I was half in love with her myself. She was that beautiful. After the tavern closed that night, Sadie sat down to join me as I shoveled down my dinner, mutton stew, thick as glue with barley. Most of Sadie's cooking was of the simple yet substantial variety. Heavy stews and pies intended to give a man the strength to work all day at sea or a fishing boat, as we were close to the docks. Of course, I spent my days holed up in my cupboard of a room with my books, as I had very little need of strength. Sadie's cooking was just giving me a fat stomach. "Well, love, how was your day?" Sadie asked, crossing her broad arms across the table. "I've been run near to death here. A whole boatload of my brothers showed up. Still, can't complain." "My day wasn't bad," I mumbled around my food. "I got new boots." "'Bout time," said Sadie. "Let's see 'em." I poked one foot around the end of the table. Sadie grunted approval. "Who made them?" she asked. "Old Roger?" No," I said, not wanting to lie, nor wanting to expose Lee. "Someone in his shop." "Malcolm?" she asked. "I didn't think his work was that good. How much you pay?" 18 silver and a card reading." Sadie whistled. 18 silver? Eddie, you're a fool for those clothes of yours." I shrugged. "I'm cheap to feed and house." Cheap for you, maybe. Not for me. Not the way you eat," Sadie teased. "I'm beginning to think I'd be better off getting more work out of you than just pretty spells and a bit of fetch and carry." "Make me work harder, and I'll just get hungrier," I said, continuing to eat. Sadie snorted. "I think I'd be afraid to see that," she said. I knew she was joking. If it were up to her, I'd probably be eating 6 meals a day. Even after 2 years of her efforts, I was still too thin for her liking. So, who wanted a reading? I shook my head. You know that wouldn't be right. Can I guess? Was it the girl? What girl? His daughter, Allison. She's promised to the heir to the shop next door and not at all happy about it. How do you know? Well, Cousin Dolores told me. I run into her at the market sometimes. She tells me everything. You see, old Roger's been apprentice to the cobbler boy's grandfather all those years ago. That's how he got to shoemaking to begin with. Well, the two shops are sort of rivals, right there side by side, but the old men of the families figure it'd be just as well to marry the children together, knock out some of the walls between the houses, and run the shop between them. How does the guild feel about that? Oh, they run the guild. It's young Allison who has the problem with it. She wants to marry her father's apprentice, that Malcolm fellow, but her father doesn't think he's skilled enough to be worthy of her. Won't let him be named a master. Though looking at your boots, I can't see why. I knew it was none of my business to pry, but my curiosity got the better of me. How does Allison's intended feel about the betrothal? Oh, hard to say, said Sadie. Dolores doesn't see much of him these days. He's quiet, keeps to himself. Seems to her, though, he'll do as his father tells him, no complaint. He knows it's in his best interest, after all. I sopped up the dregs of the stew with a hunk of bread, and then asked, do you know anything about their other servant, Lee? Oh, you mean the elf? Sadie asked. He's always following Dolores, carrying her basket, never says a word. He's a quiet, hard-working little child. He's busy in the house all morning, in the shop all afternoon till dark, and doesn't take anything but room, board, and his few scraps of clothes. Still, he is an elf. Dolores says he doesn't go to temple. Next God's Day, I had a reason to be glad of the new boots. My grandfather decided to have the whole clan over for dinner at his place on Library Row. I wore a short coat with my hose, the better to show off my new footwear, combed my hair, and generally tried to give an impression of contented success. I sat between father and the eldest of my brothers-in-law. Closer to grandfather's spot, at the head of the table, sat cousin Damien, across from his wife, Isabeau. She was small and dainty, with bright blue eyes, a rosebud mouth, and straw blonde hair that, unlike my sisters, who covered their hair with simple scarves and veils, she bound in delicate golden nets, held with a silver fillet. As usual, the food was excellent, and the conversation monopolized by Damien. I'm going up to the castle this week to consult with the royal wizard on an unusual case, he announced during the fish course. Well, that's just lovely, I said, sarcasm dripping into my plate. Thank you, said Damien, ignoring my scowl. It's going to be such a pleasure to work with Lord Gabriel again. He's such a good friend. If you believe Damien, he was bosom companion to every notable mage, from the Golden Peninsula to the Dawn Isles. Eddie was working for the master of the Leather Guild this week, put in Mother. She was always trying to stand up for me, bless her. Roger Tanner, isn't it? Asked Damien. He's a skinflint. Came to me for advice a while back. Then when he heard what it cost him, he left. Hope he didn't take advantage of you, Edward. You don't have the money sense I do. I'm doing all right, I said, head down over my plate. Of course you are, said Father, slapping me on the back so hard I nearly choked. Look at all the weight you've put on. There's got to be profit in your work. Father, like Sadie, believed one's wealth was best reflected by one's waistline. By his own standards, he was a very rich man. I had my doubts about this wizardry thing at first, he continued. You came back from your apprenticeship bony as 2 sticks, hardly knew you as my own son. But you're filling out nicely these days. My face flushed, but I said nothing. pushing my food around on my plate. Suddenly, I wasn't really hungry anymore. "Speaking of magic, have you heard the latest gossip?" put in my uncle. "I hear they hanged a foreigner out by the south gate last week for selling forbidden magic goods." "Really?" asked one of my nephews. "What kind of magic goods?" "Death stones and dragon's blood, from what I heard," my uncle said. "He was some kind of half-breed elf. Had smuggled the stuff down over the mountains from the west. He was caught trying to sell it to some wizard named Otto." "Otto's a fat old charlatan," said Damien. "I knew Lord Otto myself, of course. I'd always found him a fairly decent fellow." "Damien, don't say such things about your superiors. Lord Otto's been a wizard since before we were both born." As usual, my words were ignored. "Anyway," continued my uncle, "this Otto told one of the king's informers what the elf was selling." "And he was hanged for it?" asked the nephew. "Why?" "Because those things are deadly poison," I put in. "Not always," countered Damien. "You just have to know how to use and handle them." "I thought a death stone caused miscarriages and sickness just by being near a person," said my grandfather. "Not if it's properly contained," said Damien. "Held in a casket of lead or gold, they are harmless, and they have uses in a number of powerful spells, all of which are forbidden in this kingdom," I added. "What's dragon's blood?" my nephew asked. "Is that blood from a real dragon?" "Yes, Raglan," said Damien, "and though at full strength it is poison, it too has its uses." "Like what?" Raglan asked. "Well, I'm not permitted to reveal the secrets of my trade," Damien began, frustrated with being ignored. I answered my nephew in the most disgusting way possible. "It burns your flesh like fire, but water won't put it out. It only makes it worse, makes it spread. Your skin starts to blister and bubble with blood and then melt away, leaving only bones and a gooey mess." Damien's wife Isabeau made a gagging noise and with her hand clasped to her mouth fled the table. Damien's mother went after her. "Eddie, I think that was a little much for the dinner table," said my father, putting down his spoon and staring at me. "Yes, Edward, that was utterly uncalled for," said Damien haughtily. "And look what you've done. You've upset Isabeau. She shouldn't be upset. She's in a very delicate condition." All my sisters knew what that meant. They squealed as a body, and then all excused themselves to go fuss over Isabeau. Damien spent the rest of the meal accepting congratulations and looking smug. I tried to concentrate on my food and keeping my mouth shut. As I was leaving, my sister Margaret came up and hugged me. "Isn't it wonderful about Isabeau's baby?" she said. "Thomas and I will be married on St. Michael's Day once he's passed his guild tests. We're hoping to start a family right away. When do you think it's likely you'll be marrying, Eddie dear?" I didn't think that when I can find some fool willing to settle for a fat, red-headed, second-rate hack who pays too much for his shoes would be a good answer. So I said, I'm not even sure I'm the marrying kind, Max." Chapter 2. St. Michael's Eve. In the first week of Tanis month, I saw Lee again. He arrived at the Snake and Egg during the late afternoon lull, bearing a large leather pouch. It had been decorated to match my boots. I was sitting on my bench, waiting for customers and munching on a plate of rose-scented shortbread Sadie had pressed on me. "Master Edward," the elf said shyly, holding the bag out to me. "This is for you. I promised to pay you." I took it in my hands. "Lee, I can't accept this," he said, "not for reading one card." "Don't you like it?" he asked, shoulders drooping. "Yeah, it's beautiful and just the right size to hold on my spell gear, I said quickly, not wanting to drive the shy boy back into his shell. I should be paying you for it, though. How much would you take for it? I have a better idea, he said, speaking quickly, as if afraid he might lose his nerve. I realized he must have come with a plan, and wondered what he wanted, and if it were legal. I've asked to have a couple afternoons off each week. I could come here, and you could teach me how to read. How to read cards? Definitely illegal. The Guild of Wizards was small and therefore rather informally run, but I knew my fellows would never let me take an elf as an apprentice. No, said Lee, just how to read books and write. Please? I don't think there's any guild law against it. I felt like a heel. I'd like to know, Lee continued, and Master Roger says it would be useful. He and Allison and Malcolm all know how to read, of course, but none of them have the time to teach me. Well, I have time. When can we start? How about now? He asked, and the boy beamed at me. Here, I said, handing him the plate of shortbread. Help yourself. You need this more than I do. I'm going up to my room and bring down a book. And that was the start of my career as a tutor. 2 or 3 evenings a week, Lee would show up at the Snake and Egg, bearing a wax tablet he had scrounged from somewhere and a huge grin. He was a quick study. Less than a month after we'd begun, he'd learned all his letters. Here, let me try, he asked one night, reaching out for my copy of The Fables of St. Winifred. I handed him the book. With his tongue planted between his lips and his face screwed into a scowl, he pored over the words silently for a few moments. Then he began to speak. How Winifred learned the value of... He bit his tongue again. Temperance. That's temperance, Lee, I prompted. He looked up at me. What's temperance, Master Edward? Oh, something I'll never learn, I said with a wink, reaching for a plate of sausage rolls Sadie had left for Lee. Read the story and find out. Lee focused on the page again. One more morning, Winifred paid a call on his friend. After a few pages, he began to falter more often, and I suspected he was tired. Would you like me to read for a while? He nodded. As I read, he began doodling with my pencil on a scrap of parchment. Sadie walked up to look over Lee's shoulder. She was absolutely in love with the boy. Any child as skinny as Lee was a personal challenge, and she showered him with food every time he dropped by. Don't you want those sausage rolls? She asked him. In a minute, mistress, he said, not looking up from the parchment. Let me finish this. Oh, look at that, Sadie crowed, peering at Lee's drawing. That's beautiful. The saint and all his animal friends, clear as day. Eddie, you should tell your grandfather. This child should be working in the scriptorium. Annie, come look at this. The serving girl was already hovering near the table. She often listened in on the reading lessons, pausing to trace out letters with her fingers on the table she was supposed to be cleaning. I didn't discourage her. She was a big girl, fat in exactly the right places, and I thought her very pleasant to look at, if a trifle slow-witted. There was just so much of her to admire, and it all moved when she walked. That's nice, said Annie, looking at the drawing. Is that a pig? It's a bear, said Lee sulkily. Oh, a bear, said Annie. Yeah, I guess it is a little hairy for a pig. Sorry. She walked off. I watched her go. Lee muttered something unintelligible. What was that? Nothing, Master Edward. Please, keep reading. One evening in early Oryx month, I had finished reading the opening chapters of the first book of St. Roland to Lee and Anna and Sadie and several other people who were pretending not to be listening, when he asked, "Master Edward, why did you decide to become a wizard?" "Well, because my aunt, I guess." "Your aunt was a wizard?" "Oh, no, she was a minstrel," I said. "Magic is forbidden to women." "Why?" "Well, because of the evils done by witches in the past." You were listening, weren't you, when I read the first and fourth books of St. Corwin?" Lee narrowed his eyes. "So because a couple women in the past used their power for evil, no women are allowed to use it at all?" "Well, St. Corwin says—" "Not that I want to show disrespect to your St. Corwin," Lee said, "but it seems to me, from what you read, that he didn't think too much of women. Or elves either, for that matter." I didn't know what to say to that. No one I'd ever met would dare to question the teachings of one of the Holy Brothers. I think Lee could see the shock in my eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. It's just... Do you know how my clan talks about the coming of the Shonshu?" "No." "Our elders teach us that the brothers Corwin and Roland and their people came and helped our clans fight off the evil Empire of the Sun, the demon worshippers from the south with their goblins and their trolls and all, just like it says in your books. But then, once all of the monsters were killed and the land was free, the Shonshu, your people, they decided they wanted to stay here. They forgot, or perhaps they just didn't care, that not every clan worshipped the dark powers. They began fighting us, and we were conquered. And your people have ruled these lands ever since." I was speechless. I suppose that Lee's version of history could be considered true, if you looked at it a certain way. I just never thought to look at it that way before. Lee saw my expression. "I've insulted you," he said. "I'm sorry. I suppose you won't want to teach me anymore." No, not at all. "In fact," I said slowly, "now I'm beginning to think I might have just as much to learn from you." It occurred to me that Lee was looking with new eyes at these stories. Stories that all my life I'd taken for granted without question. "Why don't we move on to what St. Roland has to say about the elves? I think you'll like his writings a bit better than his brother's. He's not quite so opinionated." The White Lady sent for Master Roger that night. His health had been waning all spring, and with his distrust of wizards, wise women, surgeons, and healers, he had refused any offers of aid. Lee was too busy helping Dolores prepare for and clean up after the wake and the funeral to have any free time for his studies. Dolores apparently had enough time to gossip with Sadie. I learned through her that the old man had left everything to Allison. Now the burning question was, would she abide by her father's wishes and marry Dennis Cobbler, or would she break the betrothal and marry Malcolm? Since she was mistress of her own fortune now, the choice was hers. Dolores feared the former choice, since the Cobbler family already had several servants, and would likely dismiss both her and Lee. I did not particularly care what Allison planned to do. I was certain Sadie would provide a home and work for her cousin and the elf if they needed it. Besides, I was preoccupied with another wedding, that of my sister Margaret. Thank you.